iPhone 16e, John.
All right.
But the psychology of it, because I think one of the things that a lot of media will cover what Apple's doing, but not from a standpoint of why Apple does it. They seem to treat Apple like any other company. Like, why would IBM do this? We'll just apply the same logic to Apple, where I think Apple's culture is so distinct, they don't do things for regular business reasons.
If you compare to, and I don't even know if Dell does this anymore because I don't really pay attention to their stuff, but it's like in theory, the way computers or the way people used to think, like when Dell sort of stood as the canonical PC maker, it was like sell every single possible configuration. And don't worry about the name. So it's like, okay, so do you want the small phone with 3 cameras on the back? Sure, you can get that. Do you want the Pro phone with the titanium and the fancy stuff and the best chip, but you only want the 1 camera on the back because you want it to sit as flat as possible? Fine, you can get that. Right. And, that's the complete opposite.
Do you care about Do you care about metal? You can get the plastic version and save a few $100.
But you could get the plastic version with like near top specs or something like that. And Apple is more about like good, better, best, or, maybe now it's like a 4-product matrix where you got good, better, even better, and best.
Right. And
something like
that. The knock used to be that Apple's products were expensive, but I think the truth is that they just don't make cheap versions. Like, you can get versions from Dell that cost the same as any Apple product, but you can also get ones that cost a couple $100, and Apple just doesn't make those couple $100 versions.
And so saying, that the cheapest new iPhone costs $600, it's pretty expensive compared to other companies in terms of what's the cheapest model you can walk out of the store with. Apple's is the most expensive. But shocker, I mean, that's what people who know and love Apple and people who hate Apple say the same thing. I mean, it's the truth.
And what's interesting here is how they determine what features to put into what price tag and what that price tag ends up being, because I think the last SE was like $430 or something.
Yeah, and I think that the last few years have made that even more complicated, and I know, the inflation is a real thing, and it has been since the close of the COVID pandemic, that it's, it's obviously become a political issue the world over. And so the idea that prices are going to jump up by a significant amount with something like going from a 2022 iPhone SE to the 2025 16e, which is, it's not the same exact name, but it's clearly the replacement. The inflationary angle has to be considered. Yeah. If they had kept the price the same, or even if they had made it a flat $500 starting point instead of $600, of inflation adjusted, just compared to early 2022, that would be a price decrease.
Yes.
And I know that doesn't make sense to some people, but it really is the truth.
Especially with additional storage, because the storage is doubled over what the previous version was.
Right.
Yeah, I always had the sense that what Apple does for pricing is they pay off the bill of materials, plus they amortize how long it's going to take to pay off the new technologies they're introducing, because some of those aren't cheap until they get to scale. And then they add whatever they feel like they're comfortable with their margin. And in some very few cases, like AirPods, they are willing to go with lower margin to get better mass adoption. But in most cases, they have like a set margin they want, and that ends up being around the price that they put it out at.
And the other thing is, and you know this, but it just because it's a little bit more unusual compared to other companies, Apple really considers the prices part of the branding, for lack of a better term. And they position things at a price that are like, well, let's have, and I keep saying $500, it's or $600, it's $599.
Yeah.
But by rounding up that extra dollar, it really helps me keep it straight, because that marketing trick of pricing it at $99, it works.
It really does.
A certain way. It's like your brain files it in a bucket of the 500.
I would never pay really $600, but it really is $500, so I'm happy to pay it.
But they really do think of that as like a pricing tier. Like, here's the phone that is $599, and they want it to sort of hold that price. And look at the SE that just went away. It debuted in 2022, and the pricing stayed the same it was on the market for 3 years, and the prices stayed the same for the 3 years because it was part of the brand of the SE. So whatever value you think the iPhone SE had when it debuted, I think it was March 2022, but we'll just say early 2022, clearly the value proposition dropped each passing day. But if by a week ago, when it was the last week that the SE was on sale, it was a much worse value than it was when it debuted. And nobody knows, because that's the other thing. Apple doesn't say, here's the brand new 16E, and we plan to keep it on sale for 3 years.
Yes.
Or we plan to keep it on sale for 2 years. And in fact, by shifting the name to put the number in 16, it has people genuinely wondering, well, maybe it's only going to be here for 1 year, and there'll be a 17E next year that replaces it.
Because otherwise it'll seem like it's dating itself much faster.
Right. And so Apple knows what they hope to do with the 16. They're just not talking about it. And if that hope is that it stays on the market for 3 years, it'll probably stay on the market for 3 years at the exact same prices that it's at right now.
Yeah. Do you think the name will make a psychological difference? Because the beauty of the original SE name was that it sort of was timeless. It didn't lock itself to a number. So
Right.
the SE was there every year, even as the normal phone would increment itself. But now, like, next year there'll be a 17 and this will still be a 16 unless they update it. And then, like, it'll be 2 years behind and then visibly 3 years behind.
This is like the last thing Apple would ever explain is what's their thinking behind the name of a product, right? It's not just that they don't want to explain it. It's that they surely consider it competitive, in terms of how we think about branding and naming. But so I can only guess, but I have to wonder if even they think the iPhone SE naming was confusing to customers. And it is weird. The whole naming system for iPhones is different, right? There's MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs don't get numbers. So who knows what number the MacBook Pro is at.
Right. They have model numbers, right? If you go in and look, but they're not front facing.
Right. There's but the model number 2 is like MB56.
Or there's like 21,1. But even iPhones are different. Like iPhone 17 might be iPhone 32,3. It's
right. And I remember, I'm pretty sure you and I have talked about this on either my podcast or your show over the years. Like, when the iPhone, let's say iPhone 6 came out, and we would have a conversation like, what do you think they're going to do? You think we're really going to see like iPhone 11, iPhone 12? I mean, surely they're going to drop this numbering thing every year, one of these years, right? These numbers are getting really big. And now here we are up to 16, and everybody just assumes this coming September's phones will be the iPhone 17s. I mean, I would bet on it, but I wouldn't bet everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's Apple. They might change, but if they stick with it, naming this phone the 16E instead of the SE 4th generation, it helps everybody, whether you're informed like us and the people who watch and listen to our shows, or just like Joe and Jane random consumer who just wait until their old phone breaks, or they drop it, or they give it to their kid and like, I guess I'll get a new phone. And they don't even remember that Apple comes out with new phones every September. They when they need a new phone, they go buy a phone. And if you just look at the phones, putting the 16 in the name at least helps you kind of square it with.
It tells
like
you the generation
Pro,
right up front.
Pro. Yeah, tells you the generation. Pro sounds more expensive. Yeah. No adjective at all sounds like the default regular one, which is how people are meant to think about it. And the lowercase e, kind of says like, I don't know, economy.
Yeah. The other thing is like the size, because I know some people liked it that the iPhone SE was typically smaller than the current normal model. But I remember talking about demand forecasting, and it might have been with you, where with the original SE, Apple wasn't certain if it was selling because it was smaller or because it was cheaper. And so they experimented with the iPhone 5C, I think, at some point, or maybe this was before that. They experimented with cheaper, and they made the Mini and experimented with smaller. And the Mini never seemed to, people loved it, but it didn't get huge market share, because a lot of countries, your phone is your primary computer. You need the biggest screen possible. And the ability to have a small luxury, like having an extra small phone, felt like a luxury that a lot of people didn't adopt. So they didn't continue it. And now this phone isn't even smaller anymore. This is practically the same size as the regular iPhone.
It's a shame, because while I didn't buy an iPhone mini, I kind of regretted not. I kind of wish that at least one of those 2 years, and probably for battery life reasons, the iPhone 13 mini had significantly better battery life than the 12 mini. And the only reason I didn't either year was the cameras, that I really wanted, because I really use and care about my camera enough that the image quality difference kept me on the bigger ones. But it really is a shame that they weren't more popular, because the people who prefer the mini size prefer it so strongly, more strongly than any other fans of any other iPhone size for any reason feel about it. But they're just clearly that, they tried it for 2 years and the results, obviously speak for themselves. They just wasn't popular enough. And that, again, is like why Apple is a different company. And it's, this is a case where it's frustrating, where other companies might be like, sure, we'll just add 2 more phones every year and do mini, regular, and the
one
Plus
at every
Pro
quarter
Max
inch screen
size. Sure. Right. Instead of 4 new phones every September, we'll do 6, but Apple doesn't want that complexity in the product matrix.
Right.
I think they already feel like, man, we're really stretching it with how many iPhones we're asking people to look at when they come into the store.
Yeah. They want the fewest products to cover the largest market segment as possible.
Right.
What do you think about the cameras?
I suspect that from an objective viewpoint, the 16E camera is probably worse, in quotes, than even the 15 at $100 more. But it's a good camera, right? It really is. So I do kind of feel like the go-go years of I really want a new, it's worth it to me to spend the money to upgrade every single year just for the iterative year-over-year camera improvements, because I'm taking all these pictures of my family, my kids, everything else. It's, and I don't want to look back 20, 30 years from now and think, man, I could have had better pictures if I had spent the money. At this point, there still are camera improvements every year, but they're so much more iterative. I think that you really can get so much more benefits out of any camera from any iPhone of the last 3-4 years, just by being a little conscious about like holding your hand still, really looking around, just classic how to be a better photographer stuff that's been true for 125 years of photography. Look at the light, look for shading, look for interesting framing and stuff like that, that you really should not be obsessed over the difference in the hardware.
To your previous point, what I find so interesting is that the iPhone's camera, and almost every modern smartphone camera, is like the physical optical hardware, the software that they're using, plus the silicon these days. And historically, the iPhone SE has not had the optics of the current generation of main phone, but they've had the silicon. And so a lot of the technology behind it makes it shoot better than, the camera of that same optical year would otherwise shoot. So my guess is it'll be better than its optics otherwise allow it to be. And Apple tends to make up, like the iPhone camera isn't 2 or 3 cameras, it's a camera system. And quite often when you're trying to shoot telephoto, you'll see it switch to the other camera and punch in anyway, because the main camera gets way better light, like it pulls in way more light. So this feels like it's doing like it's a one camera system, but it's still a camera system. You just don't have the option of using like the optical telephoto lens if you have enough light for it anymore.
I think there's an awful lot of people in the sort of middle ground, the very sweet, big area of the bell curve of how much they care about their photos, where they care enough, they take a fair amount of photos, but they really just open the camera app, frame it, take a picture. And they never switch, they never zoom. And so they're really shooting 1x photos 98% of the time. It's a real clear market differentiator that this one only has one and it's not the top tier one spec wise. But I think, boy, there's a lot of people who still care about their photos who would be perfectly happy with it.
When we look at what's missing from this phone, or quote unquote missing, or what Apple's doing to both differentiate this from the full phones, but also to meet the price point that they want. One of the things, like, Marquez Brownlee always talks about not having 120 plus hertz, like 120 hertz, 144 hertz display. Apple famously has only ever had that on the Pros. And maybe it's because, like, at Apple scale, getting enough of those OLED displays is prohibitive. Like, the yield rates just aren't high enough. Or maybe, like, it costs more than they want to put into the price tag of the phone. But for whatever reason, like, this is still 60 60 hertz. I don't see it, but other people say like they literally see it stuttering.
I think that I would have seen it better when I was younger. So I think part of it is middle-aged eyes, at least on my part. And I definitely tried to pay attention to it in September when I was reviewing all the iPhone 16 models. And I can see it, but I really only notice when I'm looking for it. So for me, it's not that big a deal. But again, Apple is ideally trying to get as many people as possible who, if they have the budget for a more expensive one, to get the more expensive one. So, the upside of the Marquez argument that, hey, I really noticed this and it's a lot better is, okay, here's the answer. Buy the Pro model, right? And it's like, is Tim Cook really going to try to talk Marquez Brownlee's listeners out of, well, I really care about it, so I guess I have to spend $200 more and get an iPhone Pro.
It is really interesting to see, again, like where those price points. Another thing you pointed out, I think everyone's pointed out, is MagSafe. Like you can wirelessly charge, but you can't use all the MagSafe accessories that are on the market. And whether that's, again, to lower the cost or to create more space for a battery, like it is one of the things you're giving up in order to get that price point.
And how much of it is pricing and how much of it is the marketing differentiation of saying, yeah, a bunch of people come in and they're like, boy, this 16E really is tempting, but I've already got MagSafe and I'm so used to it. Oh, I've got one in my car too, and then it's like, oh, poor you. You have to spend $200 more on a iPhone with MagSafe, right? I mean, they have to make some kind of marketing differentiation features. I know there's some speculation too that with the shift to Apple's in-house modem with the C1 chip, and that magnetic interference is a real problem in the real world, that Qualcomm has 20, 30 years of experience fine-tuning. And either A, there were problems with the C1 with magnetic interference if they put the MagSafe magnets in, or just to avoid that for their first modem, they planned all along to make a modem that didn't have to worry about working with MagSafe. Like maybe it doesn't mean the S1 or the C1 is interfered with MagSafe, but they just didn't want to have to worry about it for the first generation. And it made room for a bigger battery, and it created some market differentiation, right? A, B, and C.
I wonder,
But it is weird. It does seem weird not to have MagSafe. It's the biggest curious omission in my opinion.
I think like you're just like your Jaws, and you're sitting at the table with whomever you sit at the table with when you're Jaws, and you're figuring out like this is the price point we want to hit. What are like the things we cannot touch? Like what are our absolutes? Like it has to have the latest chipset. Like there's a list of things that you're not going to touch. It just absolutely has to ship with those. And then there's a bunch of things that you maybe don't care about at all. And then you sort of figure out what the other things are that you can put in or take out to hit that price point.
Yeah, and I think the other angle too is that somebody in that meeting is from, I keep wanting to say Luca, and I forget who the new CFO is, but somebody's there. Somebody's in there from operations who is saying that's $3.
Yes.
That's $2. And you can sit there and look at these estimated component prices and say, oh my God, I can't believe they're cheaping out on this $7 versus $5. But, $2 here, $3 there, and all of a sudden you're up to $50.
Yeah.
Because there's an awful lot of components.
And that's 50 million when you're selling a million units.
Right, exactly. And they sell a lot more than a million units.
Let's talk about the modem for a second. This is interesting because Apple bought Infineon many years ago, and everyone thought they were going to be making a new modem. And that's non-trivial to get a new modem out because there's so many carriers and so many different wavelengths all around the world. There's very little consistency, and the iPhone is an international product. It's got to work where you live in Philadelphia. It's got to work downtown Berlin. It's just got to work all those places. Right. They have released their own modem now. It's 5G frequency range 1, so low and mid band. It's not frequency range 2, so no millimeter wave, which I still think is like not a consumer thing for most people. I don't think it's a deal breaker at all. But it is interesting that they have shipped a modem. There is a new silicon family. We've got the C series chips.
What people really care about is do I get a good signal everywhere I go, right? And so like the real test has nothing to do with supporting millimeter wave with these crazy fast speeds. It's like, do I have what normal people consider more than fast enough to just download and start streaming YouTube or TikTok video as soon as they hit the play button, or to start listening to a podcast that just dropped and hasn't been downloaded.
To get that app I want when I'm out and about.
Yeah. Right. exactly. Get a new app that's, oh boy, I want to get this app, but it's 150 megabytes. How long is it going to take to install? Everywhere I go. Or is this modem going to have dead spots where side by side with an iPhone 16 or 16 Pro or iPhone 15 with the Qualcomm modem, it has a signal on the same carrier.
Which used to be a big debate because Apple used to dual source their modems. I want to make sure I get the Qualcomm version.
Yeah. Is this crap in certain locations is a much better question than is this incredible AAA download speeds in a few spots.
And Apple has been making, because the modem is just one part of a package. Like Apple's been making their own antennas for years. I believe they've been making their own RF system for years. The modem is like the bottom layer of that cake. We famously, iPhone 4, Apple was making antennas. They've learned a lot since then, but they've gotten very good at making better antennas that are less interrupted, that can dynamically switch things around, that don't have dead spots on them. They've gotten really good. They used to have like 3 or 4 areas of transparency for 5G on a phone. Yeah. And the Apple would put them behind the screen, behind the camera, behind the little cutout on the side. And now I think they're down to like 1 or 2. So they have been progressing. And it'll be interesting to see, like, not just whether C1 goes into the next iPhone, but like over 2, 3, 4 years, if they can keep up the rate of innovation they did with the CPUs or the SoCs.
Yeah, I mean, and their trajectory so far is when they give a chip a name, it's pretty good, right? The M1, the first Apple Silicon chips for Macs, people couldn't, reviewers across the board, not just from the Mac side, but from the PC side of the reviewing industry, just couldn't be effusive enough about how amazing they were and the longevity. And even now with M4 Macs having been out, you see it all over and over again where people are saying, these look great, but my M1 series Mac, doesn't feel slow at all in any way. I mean, I personally am in that boat with an M1 MacBook Pro, which is mind blowing. I'm just not used to that. Like I spent over a month, I didn't write the review, but let's say it's coming. But I spent over a month using an M4 MacBook Pro full time and then went back to my personal M1 MacBook Pro. And in years past, going -3 generations of a CPU in the Intel era, go back even further to the PowerPC era, go back even further to the 68K era of Macs, go back 3 generations of a chip, it would be like, who put all this chewing gum inside my computer, right? It would be like unusable going back. I went back to my M1 MacBook Pro and it was like I didn't notice. Not because the M4 isn't faster. I could look at the benchmarks, but it's faster in ways that don't really matter to me. So hopefully them putting their name and giving this modem a C1 chip is their stamp of approval that, yes, we're as proud of this as we are of the M1 or the A4 when they first started naming Apple Silicon chips, or the W1 for wireless, or, all of those chips have proven to be good. So I would say that's the best reason for confidence, just from, I always call it Cupertinology, like the old Kremlinology of trying to follow what's going on in Soviet Russia. That the fact that they gave this thing a name C1 says a lot, as opposed to the other way. If they were worried, I think if they were worried about it, they wouldn't have given it a name. And they wouldn't have talked about the modem. They just would have said the iPhone 16e supports super fast 5G wireless everywhere you go. And we wouldn't know that because they don't list, if you look at the tech specs, they don't list Qualcomm, whatever modem for the iPhone.
Comms in the package.
Yeah, they don't list that stuff. So we'd have to wait, I think, until like iFixit gets their hands on one at the end of next week and takes it apart, and they're like, whoa, this actually is, the rumors were right. This isn't a Qualcomm modem. This is, seems like an Apple-produced modem, but it wouldn't have a name on it, I think, if they weren't proud of it. Yeah. So we'll see. But, I think it's a sign of confidence that they put a name on it.
These phones, collectively, the iPhone 16, I know that sets off some of Apple marketing when you put the S at the end of that big debate. iPhone 16 devices. When you look at that family, they've been marketed heavily on Apple Intelligence, which is still rolling out these many months later. Did it surprise you that so much of the marketing was on Apple Intelligence, which is like it is a hardware-bound software feature, but it's still a software feature, which is unusual for Apple, who a lot of times has a very strong marketing message behind the actual hardware of the phones?
It does surprise me. I don't find Apple Intelligence impressive or useful at all. I don't think it's a problem for Apple per se, because I also don't think that by adding it to the systems, they've distracted from any of the stuff. If you want to turn it off, you can just turn it off. And if you want to just leave it on and ignore it, which is more or less where I am, or I don't really use it. So it does surprise me personally, at least at first, that the marketing is all about it. But I'm very conscious of the fact that my interest in the industry isn't like a normal person at all. And I think for a normal person, they just hear AI everywhere, and they don't know where they're supposed to use it or how. And that Apple is the company that, by making it so simple and obvious and not making you choose things like from a list of 6 different models named 3.0, 4.0, 4.0 Plus and stuff like that. No, it's just, you just use it or don't use it. And maybe they're taking a guess, or maybe they know that it really resonates with the general audience. The anecdotal evidence I have that it registers is my wife is a big listener of the Howard Stern show. And I was listening. In fact, it was at least 2 episodes where I'll be up in the kitchen where she's listening to the Howard Stern show. And they were talking about the new iPhones. This was back more when they came out in September, October. And they, as people who were interested in buying new iPhones but are not, the Howard Stern show, they're not like, it's not a tech show at all. We're really, really into the whole now it has AI angle. It really resonated for them. And, if anything, they're sort of cynical and don't want to act like their interests are steered by commercials they've seen on TV. It just really was something that they were like, yeah, I think I'm going to get the new iPhone because I want to see this AI stuff. So I guess I'm not surprised that if the whole world's talking about AI, that Apple thinks it's going to resonate with customers. And it does. The end result of that, though, is it does make today's iPhone lineup with the 16e replacing the SE really kind of weird, because the iPhone 15 is still in there and doesn't support Apple Intelligence, which I think if Apple were a normal company, they might just drop out of the lineup. But they're not a normal company. They want to keep that year-old iPhone in the lineup at that price point until September, when the iPhone 16 drops into that spot at the same price, $699, $700, and does offer Apple Intelligence, right? There's kind of running out the clock now for 7 months with one phone that doesn't support Apple Intelligence.
So I guess if we were to sum this up, if you were giving advice, like you're talking to a family member, a friend, a fellow nerd maybe, and they're vacillating between the iPhone 16e and the iPhone 16, where would you sort of direct them and why?
I honestly would start with MagSafe. Like, do you already use MagSafe? Do you really like it? Do you have them in your car? Do you have, and if they say yes, I'd say, well, then think about using a phone that doesn't have it. And yes, you can rest it on a MagSafe puck and it will charge, but at a much slower rate. And because it isn't magnetic, it won't stick. So any kind of like a desktop mount you have, where it requires the magneticism, it doesn't just rest on it like on a tabletop flat. It rests like an easel with a magnetic connection. Think about that. Yeah. And if the answer is, nah, I don't, I just plug in by USB-C, I don't use MagSafe or something like that, or I only use it once in a while, but I don't care if it sticks or not. I would definitely think an awful lot of people could get by with the 16E, and and do you notice any of the other things? Do you notice, the lack of an ultra wide camera? I'd say, like, go look back at your photos from the last year and see how many times do you use the ultra wide. If you use it 5-10% of the time, maybe it's worth it to spend $200 extra to get a new phone that also has one too. But I think there's an awful lot of people who are like, what is the ultra wide? And it's like, oh, you've got one on your camera. And they're like, oh, I never use that.